Hi, welcome to Google Cloud Next. My name is Paul Nashawaty. I'm the practice lead and principal analyst for the App Dev practice. I'm joined by Chris. Chris, how you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you here. Why don't you introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah, so my name is Chris Hein. I'm the field CTO for our Google public sector. So I'm responsible for the technical strategy of the US public sector and how to really bring what the best of Google is into the public sector, whether that's education or the government sector, and really just using what Google tools have to satisfy those missions.
Well, speaking of Google tools, I mean, the show floor is amazingly busy, right? What is it, 30,000+ people here? It's really, really exciting. The keynote was exciting. It was, well, lots of stuff going on. So, Chris, let's just jump right into it. We're seeing that 59% of organizations are invested in Agentic AI for autonomous IoT operations, right? We're seeing for Gemini for government is positioned as the front door for a lot of these activities. What does that mean? Because, 68% of measuring AI ROI as cost savings and 64% is measuring it for time savings, right? So when agencies are looking to modernize these decades-old workflows, what does this mean for Gemini for government?
Yeah, I think a lot of what we're seeing is this kind of multi-pronged approach where the very first thing that we've got to land with is we look at Gemini for government and we say, how are we going to augment what those staff are already doing, right? One of the really important parts of it is making sure that we're creating a safe and a compliant place for them to really explore what does it mean for them to have their job with AI as a core component of it. Because a lot of them, they may be experimenting a little bit in their home life, right? Like, you can't get away from AI right now, it's everywhere. And so it's starting to saturate their environment. And so now we need to really focus in with them to say, all right, here it is, and let's make sure that you can go and you can play and see how is that making you more productive on your daily tasks. And so we start there. We start to try to make sure that they can be more, like the high level term becomes that operational efficiency. They can get more done in each one of their days. But then we want to really start to invest with them, to start to see what does it look like to really rethink the mission objectives themselves, so that you start to say, we go from, I like to quote, Larry Page, founder of Google, often said that he wanted all of his Google tools to pass the toothbrush test, right? Which was every person would want to use them hopefully twice a day, right? And so it was this kind of, okay, that's a good barometer for are we adding value into those workers' day-to-day experience, that they would log in and use it at least twice a day.
I definitely like that analogy, right? When you're looking at it, using it twice a day, trying to understand it. But often I hear from CIOs and such that the two main challenges that organizations run into is skill gap and complexity issues. I'm sure we see the same challenges in public sector, right? It's an area that it's just kind of uniformly going to be an issue, right? So what does that mean, like adopting new technologies, using it twice a day, making it easier, making it frictionless for these organizations to deploy? What does that mean for government?
Yeah, I think one big part of that is that it requires both a tops-down and bottoms-up approach. This is where we've seen it work best. Because people need to be given, the right guidelines, right? They need to feel safe that if they use AI in this way that is supported, right? That's what they should be doing. So you need that top-down guidance of, hey, we want you to be investing your time in understanding this. But then you also have this bottoms-up approach of really giving broad access to those sets of tools and then creating some, easy ways for them to understand what is that quick hit. What's that thing that it changes about their daily task that is meaningful to them, right? Like, I think this is one of those things is we really try to work with them to understand what an agentic workforce looks like, is you've got to start from this basis of saying, it's got to be a task. It has to have a begin point and an end point.
Right.
Otherwise, the agents are going to get lost. And then it's got to have value. Like, so if I've got something that has a beginning point and an end point, but having it be valuable to both the worker and the overall kind of administration, that's where we start to see sweet spots.
Yeah, and I think that it makes a lot of sense to kind of integrate it into the culture, integrate it into the environment, how it works. But it also means that governance, regulations, and compliance need to be taken into consideration. And that's incredibly important, especially when you start talking about government data and government activities. But we're seeing like Google is uniquely leveraging accredited commercial cloud for software-defined architectures. We're also seeing zero trust isolation for US governments rather than seeing customers really building siloed, feature-lagging gov cloud, right? So that's something that's coming up. But from our research, we see that 86% of organizations are actively redesigning their environments to modernizing is no longer an option, right? Now, in my world, in the app dev space, modernization's a treadmill, right? It's continuous. So when we look at this, agencies are tackling massive tech debt, right, and how to modernize their legacy or heritage application. I don't like saying legacy because a lot of times people go, that's not legacy. But the applications, and how does Google full stack approach the elimination of the integration tag? How is that helping, and what's Gemini doing for that?
Yeah, I think, I like your analogy of saying that, app development has to be a treadmill, right? It's not a singular point in time.
Right.
That great, we are modernized and we never have to worry about this again, right? And so that then really starts to get even further upended into, especially governments like to have these contracts where it's like, you do the thing and then you're done doing the thing, right? And so it kind of upends a little bit of their thinking to say, we can actually create continuous improvement using AI as a facilitator to that. And that starts to come into some of the coding tools and coding assistance that makes it so that it, even if they've got a somewhat less skilled workforce, we can now upskill them by saying they need to really be the experts on what their domain knowledge is. They need to understand what they're trying to accomplish. And then they need to learn how and where to trust these AI agents to continue to help them get there. And so then we start to see it lead them to a place where it says, over time, it's learning, it's getting better, we're continuing to improve across that, and that starts to allow us to sunset more and more of some of the, not legacy, but maybe last year's investments as they push forward into the future.
Can you speak a little bit about the adoption rate and how that's coming?
Yeah, it's been one of the more exciting times that I've seen because, government typically speaking is,
risk averse.
We'll call them risk averse, we'll call them laggards sometimes.
Yeah.
But this has been a place where we are actually seeing government in the lead. We're seeing multiple installations where they're using these Gemini tools and they are getting in and they are outpacing what we're seeing out of the commercial side, which is insane to say. Right?
Absolutely.
We've never seen that before.
No.
But what it speaks to is that the need is just so deep, right? There's so much work to be done and so few people to do it. And so there's just this real deep need to try to get to a better place in terms of this. And so we're really trying to help to make sure that they are getting the most out of those tool sets.
Absolutely, and when we see 63% of organizations are citing security as a challenge where they're not adopting, this is good to hear that security is being addressed as part of this activity because obviously they're adopting it, so it's working well. So, all right, let's talk about the open ecosystem because like when we look at Gemini for government and open architecture, it really gives the flexibility to run government frontier models, right? And how to use those frontier models, especially as you're looking at open source options like via Vertex AI, right? As developers are using AI to rewrite modernization legacy applications, what's the approach to help them avoid vendor lock-in, and how can they move forward with that?
Yeah, I think it's really important for government to have optionality. And so what we've been stressing as part of the Gemini for Government rollout is that our overall ecosystem gives us access to all of the open weights models, right? All of those are now available to them through the Model Garden. We've got multiple other frontier class models that they can utilize, and then that becomes an additional agent that they have access to. And you mentioned, and it's just an important thing to really hone in on, is that that's only possible for them if we can make sure that those things can be done in an accredited and secure and private way. And so it's been a really important part of it is that we want to help you with your open stack, but we've got to be able to do that in a way that you're not putting yourself at risk of those things being non-compliant or something that's going to create security concerns down the road.
So how does this help them with deploying their applications, their mission critical applications anywhere and at the tactical edge?
Yeah, a lot of it does mean that it starts to create, right, whatever your best coding model is for you, to be able to start to utilize that at that kind of, we have some agencies that are right now working and using that to modernize COBOL systems, right? So they're finally getting to some of these mainframes and starting to modernize that. But then there's also this need to be able to deploy and understand artificial intelligence tools, as you mentioned, at the edge. And so if you need to tune a model, if you need to be able to take something that's an open weights model and adjust that to a purpose that is going to be used at the edge, that's one of those things that having this accredited platform that allows you to do that tuning, use the GPUs and Google's TPUs to be able to do that tuning job, but then deploy that out into the ecosystem where you need it.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing that 86% are calling edge computing very important or critical to their AI strategy. So edge is non-negotiable at this point. So I think it's important to kind of call that out and to highlight that as well. All right, so talking about Gemini for government and how it integrates seamlessly with Google Workspace, and it meets the FedRAMP and DoD standards and security compliance. Can you talk a little bit about that and what that means?
Yeah, it's really been transformational for the agencies as they've started to look into this and started to adopt it, right? Because what it has meant for them to have this fully secure and compliant environment that allows them to start to really take action, right? So a phenomenal example of this is the US Department of Transportation has now moved their entire workforce onto Google Workspace.
Okay.
And they're looking at that from the perspective of really making them more productive, but they're also looking at a huge amount of cost savings as a result of this. The vendor that they've been working with, right, like they're now able to really change and see huge operational efficiencies come from that. And then also a huge part of that is having access to Gemini and then being able to think differently about how they do their tasks and really getting their workforce on board on that.
Well, let's talk about scale though, because when we think about this, driving transformation at scale, what we see is the Department of Transportation at the cabinet level migration replaces legacy providers that provided workflows for over 50,000 employees. That's not a small task.
Right.
So how does that work in the context of scaling an issue? Are you breaking it up into smaller chunks and smaller environments? How does it work?
So there's two aspects to it, right? So one is the technology side, and then the other is the workforce side. And on the technology side, the great news is that because we run on the commercial accredited cloud, we have no capacity challenge on that, right? So it becomes hey look, open the floodgates whenever you're ready because we're ready for you. However, we know that people change slowly, right? Sometimes slower than the tech does.
Right.
And so what we're really looking at in all cases there is, what is the people process? How do we work directly with you to make sure that that kind of evolves to be a really successful rollout? You're moving people's day-to-day operational experience. That's something that has to be taken into account. And so there you look at having a kind of an early adopters wave. Those people can kind of propagate it out to additional people across the agency, and then you start to roll that more effectively so that you're not trying to change everybody all at once.
Okay, so that makes sense. I think what I would actually be concerned about here is the governance, compliance, and regulations that go along with that. When we look at things that are going into effect, now I know the government here is not necessarily intentionally impacted by it, but the EU CRA, for example, is going into effect, right? That means that applications that are built in the EU have to comply with reporting by September of this year, and by December 27 have to be in full compliance. We also have standards here, and those also have to be in full compliance. So let's talk about compliance friction and its known AI adoption barrier for scaling. How can you address that? How do you make the audience feel comfortable with the fact that with Gemini we have the ability to put those compliance regulations and governance in place. So, we're a global economy, right? And there's things that are happening. If we're building applications, they have to be in compliance across these multiple standards that are out there. How do we ensure that's going to be into effect?
Yeah, it's been something that we've really been building for and focusing on for, I'd say, almost a decade now. And so what that has meant for us is that, again, Google did not choose to make a Gov Cloud, because what we wanted was to have an accredited software platform that makes it so that you get the best of the entire world on your compliance regime. But what we've then built that into is this kind of, look, we can enforce those boundaries for you. And so if you need to have US data location, great. That's an easy thing that we can configure in the console for you. So now everything that you deploy is always going to be US based, right? And so it starts to create this ecosystem that says, are you HIPAA compliant? All right, don't worry, we can make sure that that gets accredited for you as well. But the reason this, in the AI era, the reason I think this is just such an important inflection point for us is to think about, there is such a crunch on GPU and the capacity to be able to run these things at that level of scale. And so to be able to do that inside of GovClouds and all these kinds of things, it doesn't scale well. And so being able to use it in our accredited cloud means we have no issue on that for our customers.
So talk a little bit about DOT's FedRAMP high migration story, right? Because this was a big part of the AI initiative. So that was a success story that you had, right?
Yep.
So how does that work?
Yeah, because what that really alleviated for them was this, having to pick and choose from just small places here, small places there in terms of what's compliant, okay, well that one's not, so we can't. It creates this really, fractured environment to say, hey, we want you to be using AI tools, but not that one, and not that one, and not this thing over here. But instead to be able to say, now you have, inside of this workspace product, everything that you need to be fully compliant, but also gives you frontier access. That kind of alleviates them and changes their ability to really start to say, no, everything is ready, and it pushes to the users this kind of feeling of safety and security that they can really experiment and feel safe that they're not going to be breaking a law that they should not be breaking.
No, I love that approach. I mean, especially when you give that sense of security, a safety net that you're okay. All right, let me ask you this, Chris. So we're sitting here at Google Cloud Next 2027, a year from now, right? And so we're out there, we're thinking about this. Where do you see this all going in a year?
This is that hard thing about where the world is today of even getting 6 months out is sometimes a hard thing to know what the world's going to look like. So a full year sometimes feels like an aggressive ask. But I think what I'm excited for, what I think we're going to be seeing over the course of these next 12 months, and the stories we'll be able to share with each other next year at this time, is really starting to see the agentic workforce take place, right? Where it's not just, we've seen good statistics saying that, more and more agencies are putting agents into their production environment, but I think that we're seeing kind of small around the edges in terms of what those things are capable of doing today. And now what I think we'll see in 1 year's time is just this whole workforce transformation, where you start to see whole ways of how do you accomplish your mission with these AI agents as a valuable part of the team. That's going to be the success stories that I'm excited about for next year.
I agree. I think that last year was a year of experimentation, and this is the year of implementation. Next year is going to take us to that next level. Absolutely. Chris, always a pleasure talking to you. This has been great. Your insights have really been awesome for the audience here to watch and understand.
All right, fantastic. Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you. And thank you for watching. Paul Nashawaty coming to you live from the show floor at Google Cloud Next 2026.